Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 13th August 2020, and these are the articles we'll be dealing today. The first article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled Stop the Dismantling of Environmental Rules. So this is in the context of the draft environmental impact assessment notification that was released by the Ministry of Environment, and there was a lot of uproar against this particular draft because it was believed that a lot of processes within the environmental impact assessment as a design have been diluted, and thereby it destroys the carefully drafted environmental regulations that we have built over a lot of time. So let us have a deep understanding about this environmental impact assessment, the notification and the criticisms. In this context, let us understand what exactly is EIA and what are the international standard definitions in this context. So the right definition is given by UNEP. So UNEP says that this is a tool to understand the impact a particular economic activity will have on the environment, what are the socio-economic impacts, what are the cultural impacts, what is the effect on human health. All these are considered. So basically it tries to understand the multi-dimensional impact of a project in an area. So the crucial point that we have to understand here is this tool is carried out through a consultative process. This consultative process also has a legal backing in the form of a law, that is the Environmental Protection Act 1986. However, an amended version of this act came out in 2006. So as per this particular notification, it is mandatory for various projects, say for example mining or thermal power plants, river valley infrastructure projects, for all of these to get environmental clearance. However, there is a difference between this 2006 notification and the earlier 1994 notification. So even though this particular tool for assessment of impact on the environment came up through the 1986 law, the notification for the first time was released in 1994, which was later amended in 2006. In this 2006 version, unlike the EIA notification of 1994, this had put the onus of clearing projects on the state government. So the important preliminary pointers here are EIA as a tool arises from the Environmental Protection Act 1986. It was notified for the first time in 1994. In 2006, it made it mandatory to have environmental clearances, and the onus of clearing those projects environmentally are put on the state governments. So this notification has laid down various steps like screening, scoping, collection of data, impact prediction, public hearing, decision making, etc. So these steps can be viewed when you go back to your basic lessons on environmental impact assessment taught in your environment classes. So after reading those, you will understand that the underlying philosophy is public consultation, as already discussed earlier in the article. So this public consultation is considered to be the key aspect of our environmental impact assessment, and it takes into consideration the concerns of the public residing in an area where this project is being taken into consideration. Another important point that we have to understand in the 2006 provisions is the fact that there are two categories. Most of the projects which are in category B are placed under the state government to give approvals. But however, there are certain projects which also have a central level control. So the projects belonging to the category A, which are notified in the notification of the 2006 version of EIA, will have to take permission from the central government. So this is the background in which EIA was set up. So the controversy in the present context began in March 2020, just after the lockdown time. The Union Environment Ministry had been considering to come up with a new draft of EIA. However, this particular version of EIA had been open for feedback, and June 30 was set as the last date for taking any approvals or any inputs from the public. However, there was a severe backlash with respect to the dilution of this latest version of the environmental impact assessment. There were also remarks from the court themselves where it notified the government that the process of consultation should not be treated as an obstacle because it has some sanctity, because the very philosophy of EIA stems from the fact that it is a consultative process. So you cannot look at this consultative process as a roadblock for development. The most important concern that was raised by a lot of environmentalists with this diluted form of EIA notification in 2020 was the fact that this notification has allowed for ex post facto approval of all the environmental regulations which were flouted. So this will give a leeway to all the people who were flouting the environmental norms, and it gives them a sign of encouragement that they can get away with flouting environmental norms. This is not a good precedence given the fact that we are one of the worst performing countries in environmental performance index. So consistently we are amongst the bottom 10 in this particular index. In 2018 we were placed 177 out of 180 countries. So this will not do any good for us, and the present pandemic is an example as to how our environment is closely linked to our survival. So even if we look at our cultural context, we talk about a environmental ethic in the form of the virtue called dharmo rakshati rakshita and vruksho rakshati rakshita, or prakriti rakshati rakshita. It just means that if you protect the environment, environment will protect you back. The author says that the present dilution of environmental impact assessment norms is in continuation with the negligence exhibited by the government towards environment. This can be seen in the form of the 2018 notification of the coastal regulation zone, which has impacted nearly all the fishermen in the 7,500 kilometer range because of the fact that it is affecting their livelihood. Similarly, the National Board for Wildlife, which is headed by the Prime Minister, the Forest Advisory Committee, all these regulatory bodies are ensuring environmental clearances without following the due process of law. Similarly, Forest Rights Act, which was passed in 2006 to ensure that tribers and other traditional forest dwellers do not have any issues and their cultural traditions are well preserved, even that is being diverted and diluted. Given the fact that we have to support our MSME industry, the author proposes that there should be certain benefit for the small sector companies, MSME sector companies, to follow green norms. So the onus is on the government to ensure that these companies have certain leeway in the form of incentives to follow the green norms. But it doesn't mean that this company should be completely given a clearance to flout the environmental norms, because that would be detrimental for our own environment in the longer run. So apart from this, the author also suggests that we need social audits on a regular basis. This is important because Forest Rights Act and other acts which have cultural bearing on the survival of people living in forest will have to be also taken into consideration, and not just the ease of doing business. So the first step that the government must take is to withdraw this EIA notification and come up with a better version that has wider acceptance and with something that is based on a clear scientific appraisal of the state of our environment. So that is the gist of this article. So since this is written by the leader of opposition, we have to look at this article for UPSC perspective from the various dimensions. So, what are the threats for environment in India? We can talk about these threats broadly under the category of legislations and their implementation. Mainly, it is not the law that is a problem, but the implementation and the intent of the political power that is in ruling right now. So, that is the summary of the article. The second article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled A Self-Reliant Foreign Policy. So, this is in tune with India's call for Atmanirbharta or self-reliance. Now, what is the characteristic feature of this self-reliance? Now, traditionally, whenever we talk about our foreign policy, it is mainly characterized by non-alignment. So, this has been the policy fulcrum for a lot of our independent, post-independent period, and this was right in the context of the Cold War because India has carved out its own identity in a world that was divided between two ideologies. But after the end of this Cold War and the rise of China, equations have changed. So, whenever we are talking about self-reliance, we only mean the exact opposite of non-alignment. We mean to align with multiple partners. So, the underlying fulcrum of our foreign policy right now should be engagement, not just with one or two powers, but with every single stakeholder in a region, and there should be scientific analysis of the strengths and disadvantages that India has with respect to every region. So, our objective finally should be to attain a strategic autonomy across all verticals of our foreign policy, whether it is in the terms of Navy, Air Force, or whether it is in the aspect of trade. All these factors should be considered and should be backed by proper analysis, and a workforce should be established to back up our objective of strategic autonomy. Now, why are we trying to create this strategic autonomy? This is because of our goal to create a multipolar world. Time and again across the history, we have seen the dominance of one or two powers, and this has led to the loss of other countries. So, India always believes in its sovereignty, and the concept that every stakeholder in a region, every country in the world should have a democratic right to participate in every decision that the world is taking together. So, this facilitates the ground for creation of a multipolar world, which has been our goal. So, the objective is the strategic autonomy, the goal is creating a multipolar world, and when we create this multipolar world, we have a vision of becoming the Vishwaguru. Now, when we talk about Vishwaguru, it does not mean that we want to dominate the rest of the world. It only means that India should remain as an example or a role model for every country across the world. This, for becoming a reality, should focus on building partnerships. So, in international relations, partnerships are broadly divided based on the political needs. However, if we take into consideration the needs of a country and build partnerships on the common goals. So, for example, previously data security was never an issue in international politics, but with the advent of technology, data security has emerged as a common goal for all the countries. Now, the definition of global commons is only getting wider and wider. In order to achieve consensus and at the same time ensure a strategic autonomy, it requires active engagement rather than disengagement with various stakeholders. So, we have to stop looking at India's interests on the basis of our dependency on technology, whether on the United States or whether it is on Russia. We have to stop engagement with big titans. We have to realize the power of collective consciousness and build partnership for common goals. That is how we can become the Vishwaguru or the leading example which we aspire to be. That is the gist of this article. That's it for the day. Thank you.